It's called Unite by 2030 to end violence against women. You will see the campaign's vibrant signature orange color lighting up this room today. This orange color is a symbol of our vision of a brighter orange future, free of violence against women and girls. Through Unite, governments, civil society, women's organizations, young people, businesses, the media, and the entire United Nations system are working together to stop the global pandemic of violence against women and girls. Today also marks the start of the United Nations activities through the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This is, as many of you know, an annual international civil society-led campaign which runs until 10th of December, which is also Human Rights Day. These are the activities at the UN that will follow a global theme. And the global theme this year is Orange the World. Generation equality stands against rape. The theme embodies the Secretary General's decision to commit the Unite campaign for the next 2 years to highlighting rape as a specific form of harm committed against women and girls and working to prevent it and to end it. It aligns with UN Women's Generation Equality, Realizing Women's Rights for an Equal Future campaign, and also marks, and this is all aligned, next year's 25th anniversary of the 1995 Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing. Through Generation Equality, women's advocates who shaped the conference's landmark commitments 25 years ago are joining hands with those now carrying that legacy forward. Today, they will finish making all of Beijing's commitments a reality. These include ending all forms of sexual harassment and violence against women and girls. We will need everyone to work hard because we have a lot to do in ending violence. This statistic is really shocking, but it is true. 1 in 3 women and girls in some point in their lives will experience it. Many, and that's also a shocking statistic, that many of them, probably most of them, will never know justice. They will never see the perpetrators held accountable for their crimes. Impunity is widespread, but particularly for sexual violence and rape, which happens everywhere in the world, in every country, in every community, every social group. Exact numbers of rapes and sexual assaults are notoriously difficult to confirm because of this impunity, but also because of stigma and because of silence. Sexual violence is insidious. It flourishes where it is normalized and even glamorized. There is a tactic permission to objectify and control women's bodies, which leads to committing rape as well as blaming the victim, trivializing or denying that a violation has occurred, and of course, refusing to prosecute perpetrators. In wars, sexual violence and rape have been used as a deliberate tool to terrorize women and girls in their community. In recent years, the voices of survivors and activists through numerous campaigns that reach every part of the world have reached a crescendo. Their stories have sounded the alarm about the widespread violation of women's bodies and women's rights. They have cut through complacency and silence so that entire societies have started to realize that violence must end. Today, we've come together to hear from just a few of the people who are standing against violence in diverse regions of the globe and what compelling stories they have to tell. Part 1 of the program will feature speakers from the top echelons of the United Nations. Their presence here today demonstrates how UN leadership, and in fact our entire UN system, stands behind the call to stand against rape. And they're joined today by 2 young women of remarkable courage who speak out for those, including children, who have experienced the devastating consequences of rape. Part 2 of the program will be an interactive discussion with award-winning artists and activists. and we can look forward to a rich exchange of their ideas and experience. And we have the wonderful UN International School Senior Chorus also performing with us today. So let me begin by welcoming our distinguished panel of speakers for part one. Ms. Maria Luisa Ribeiro Viotti is the UN's chef de cabinet for the Secretary General. Ms. Pramila Patten is the special representative of the UN Secretary General on sexual violence in conflict. Ms. Pumzila Mlambo Nguka is, did I say it right? Is the UN Women's Executive Director. Ms. Ajna Jusic is the president of the Association of Forgotten Children of War in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And Ms. Chinyere Iyo is executive director of Sexual Offenses Awareness and Victims Rehabilitation Initiative in Nigeria, which is a grantee of the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. It is my great pleasure to ask the chef de cabinet, Ms. Maria Luisa Ribeiro Viotti, to open this first part of the program on behalf of the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. She will tell us why ending violence is one of our most important goals and fundamental to building peaceful and prosperous societies. You have the floor.
Thank you, Melissa. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to all of you. Violence against women and girls is one of the most widespread and disturbing human rights violations in our world. 1/3 of women globally report having experienced violence at some point in their lives, mainly from their partners. As we go about our business, 1 woman in 3 that we encounter has been or will be subjected to violence. In some regions and for some groups of women, the rate is even far higher. And this is only the violence that is reported, so the real level is indeed far higher. A study conducted 4 years ago found that just 41% of countries have laws that explicitly criminalize marital rape. This widespread impunity for violence against half of the population sends a clear yet unacceptable message about the value of women's lives. Violence is harmful to the physical and mental health, well-being, and dignity of women and girls, but it also affects families, communities, and societies at large. Violence against women and girls has strong implications for global peace and security. It undermines the security of significant numbers of individuals. Rape and gender-related killings remain explicit tactics during conflicts. Violence against women also affects stability in societies. There is growing evidence of strong links between violent misogyny and violent extremism. A culture of violence against women also has serious consequences for our efforts to eradicate poverty and promote inclusive, sustainable development. Violence prevents women from participating in all areas of society in the decisions that impact their lives. It is a barrier to achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, our roadmap for peaceful, prosperous lives on a healthy planet. Addressing violence against women and girls, therefore, is a crucial means of realizing the full range of the Sustainable Development Goals, from health to equality to education to decent work and economic growth. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have to shine a light on the urgent necessity of eliminating all forms of violence against women and girls. And we literally do, under the headline, Orange the World, Generation Equality Stands Against Rape. We are lighting up iconic buildings around the world in orange, the color of the campaign. The Orange the World campaign honors women and girls who have experienced sexual violence. It also honors those who are taking action to prevent and end it, those who are challenging impunity for perpetrators and confronting a culture of rape everywhere. Let me set violence against women in its broader context. Gender equality is critical in its own right. We can never accept a world in which half the population suffers from discrimination and marginalization. We must address one of the most widespread human rights violations in the world if we are to move towards a better future for all. A strong women's movement that promotes gender equality has proven to be the single most effective way of ending violence against women and girls. Our programs must promote such movements. We must work with stakeholders to enable legal and institutional reforms, services for girls, data collection and analysis, and prevention. We must change attitudes and behaviors. The Spotlight Initiative, our partnership with the European Union to end all forms of violence against women and girls, includes all these elements. I encourage new partners to join Spotlight and make it into a universal platform by 2030. On the International Day to Eliminate Violence Against Women, the United Nations stands against rape, sexual harassment, and assault in all forms of violence against women and girls. We also stand with survivors, activists, and advocates around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Luisa, for that powerful message, also on behalf of the Secretary General. I am now honored to introduce to my right Ms. Pramila Patten, who is an Undersecretary General and the Secretary General's Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict. She is the UN's global voice and also conscience on conflict-related sexual violence. In that capacity, she's called for converting cultures of impunity into cultures of justice and accountability. You have the floor, Pramila.
Thank you, Melissa. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to be part of this important event. And this year's theme is particularly relevant for my mandate, which was established by the Security Council in 2009 to provide coherent and strategic leadership to global efforts to combat conflict-related sexual violence as a threat to collective peace and security. Since taking office in 2017, I have articulated 3 strategic priorities. Firstly, converting cultures of impunity into cultures of deterrence through justice and accountability. Secondly, fostering national ownership and leadership for a sustainable, survivor-centered response. And thirdly, addressing the root causes of sexual violence, including structural gender-based inequality and discrimination, which are consistently exacerbated by armed conflict and militarization. Conflict-related sexual violence traverses all of history and geography, affecting all ages and generations. It has often been described as history's greatest silence, the least reported, least condemned crime of war. And it is precisely this silence that shields the perpetrators and isolates the victims. The trauma of conflict-related sexual violence causes lasting damage to individuals, families, and communities. We cannot erase the scars, but we can help victims and survivors to cope and heal by listening to them and providing tailored support. I have seen both the needs and the resilience of survivors firsthand during my field visits to many parts of the world, Mali, DRC, Iraq, Central African Republic, and other places. Last month, I commemorated the 10-year anniversary of my mandate by holding a survivors hearing and launching a new global fund to deliver assistance to victims whose right to reparations remains unmet. One of the survivors who testified at this event, an indigenous woman from Guatemala, said, "We don't want history to repeat itself. We are working for progress so that our children and grandchildren never have to experience what we suffered." 10 years is a short time in the history of war zone rape, a crime as old as war itself. Yet the past 10 years have seen more concerted action to combat this scourge than the rest of human history combined. Indeed, the past decade saw a dramatic paradigm shift that heralded a new consciousness and a new consensus about the gravity of conflict-related sexual violence as an international crime. What had long been dismissed as inevitable is now understood as preventable. What had once been deemed collateral or cultural is today condemned as criminal. Acknowledging that sexual violence is often committed or condoned as a means of pursuing the military and ideological aims of armed groups has prompted political as well as humanitarian solutions. The progress we have made to date has been transformative in three aspects, namely in terms of the normative framework, our institutional capacity, and operational impact. Regarding the normative framework, 2008 saw the adoption of a breakthrough resolution, Resolution 1820. For the first time, the issue of conflict-related sexual violence was elevated onto the agenda of the world's paramount peace and security body, the United Nations Security Council. For the first time, the issue of conflict-related sexual violence was recognized as a threat to collective security and an impediment to peace. Resolution 1820 gave new responsibilities to security actors and new avenues for accountability and action to survivors and their advocates. It called for sexual violence to be addressed in transitional justice processes and excluded from the scope of amnesty provisions. Finally, the international community had accepted that the ceasefire could not be comprehensive if the gunfire stops, but the patterns of rape persist. In terms of institutional arrangements, 2009 saw the adoption of Resolution 1888, which equipped the United Nations with new infrastructure to respond. Resolution 1888 established my mandate, including as chair of the Interagency Coordination Network, UN Action Against Sexual Violence in Conflict. This resolution also established a team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence in conflict to strengthen institutional safeguards against impunity at the national level and called for women protection advisors to be deployed to the field to enhance our monitoring, reporting, and response. Subsequent resolutions have authorized specific arrangements at country level to deepen the evidence base for action and to increase the pressure on parties to comply with international norms by listing or naming and shaming those credibly suspected of abuse. They have emphasized the need for early warning and prevention and to combat sexual violence employed as a tactic of terrorism, including in the context of human trafficking. Most recently, Resolution 2467, adopted in April of this year, calls for a holistic, survivor-centered approach to inform all prevention and response measures. In terms of our operational impact, the United Nations system is today supporting thousands of survivors who had once been invisible and inaccessible. In several conflict-affected settings, the operational arms of my mandate, the team of experts on the rule of law and UN Action Network, are delivering concrete projects to support survivors. Peacekeepers are now systematically trained to detect, deter, and respond to sexual violence as part of their operational readiness standards. Sexual violence offenses have become an integral part of international criminal investigation, thanks to a growing cadre of legal specialists in this field. Mobile courts and military tribunals have convicted combatants of sexual violence crimes in settings such as the DRC and South Sudan. Recently, the International Criminal Court handed down a historic 30-year sentence to Bosca Taganda on 18 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity, including rape and sexual slavery. Last week, 3 former militiamen operating in eastern DRC, including the infamous warlord Koko Di Koko, were convicted of rape as a crime against humanity. In addition, special designation criteria on sexual violence have been included in the sanctions regime for the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Libya, Somalia, and South Sudan. As part of our operational methodology, which focuses on anchoring commitments at the national level, my office has signed joint communique to prevent and address conflict-related sexual violence with a range of affected countries. At the same time, we have begun to engage with non-state armed groups implicated in patterns of sexual violence in contexts such as the Central African Republic, Mali, and South Sudan. Excellencies, against this backdrop, and despite the progress we have made so far, we face an increasingly complex global security environment. Sexual violence continues to be used to spread fear and assert control. It remains a cruel tactic of torture, terror, and political repression, a brutally effective tool of displacement and dehumanization. The response continues to be slow. Impunity remains the rule and justice the rare exception. Services are scarce and stigma is so intense that some survivors choose to remain with their captors rather than having to face their families and feel the shame of their reproach. Security policy is still a male-dominated domain, despite clear and linking gender equality with peace. The international community has not yet adequately invested in tackling the structural root causes that perpetrate this violence, such as gender inequality. From Nigeria to Sudan, from Colombia to Bosnia and Herzegovina, women and girls are a critical constituency for conflict prevention and peace building. Yet, when formal negotiations and transitional justice processes begin, they are too often marginalized and pushed out of the picture. Addressing the root causes of conflict-related sexual violence requires offering people, and in particular young people, a hopeful future, including access to the dividends of peace and development, economic opportunities, and social services. There is a need for intergenerational dialogue to reaffirm our shared values, including the need to leave no one behind, to promote respect for diversity, tolerance, and societies free from violence. I'm encouraged to see young people mobilizing in pursuit of these objectives. Countless survivors have told me that justice is essential to helping them cope and transform their lives. Survivors also demand material assistance to rebuild their lives and livelihoods. Reparations are what survivors want most, yet receive least. At the dawn of a new decade for my mandate, it is time to deliver on these demands and put survivors first. A survivor-centered, rights-based response requires contextual solutions that give voice and choice to survivors, building their resilience and enshrining their experiences on the historical record. For several reasons, 2020 will be a pivotal year. In addition to marking the 20th anniversary of the Foundational Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, and the 25th anniversary of the visionary Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, it will also mark 75 years since the advent of the United Nations itself. This means that a lifetime has passed since the founding promise of equality between men and women was enshrined in the UN Charter of 1945. Ladies and gentlemen, rape is the only weapon of war that is both powered by and perpetrates gender-based inequality. Strategies to protect women and girls from this scourge are also strategies to protect their full and equal participation in the political, economic, and social sphere. Ending sexual and gender-based violence, which cast a long shadow of terror and trauma over countless lives, is a critical step towards empowering women to shape their destiny and that of their communities and nations. So let us set the stage for a new decade of decisive action to move from resolutions to results and from horror to hope, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, including the devastating scourge of wartime rape. Thank you.
I think that's quite a call to action, and we need to be all involved. Thank you very much, Pramila. And I'm delighted now to introduce the Undersecretary General and UN Women Executive Director, Phumzile, I'll try it again, Mlambo Ngunguka. She is, as many of you probably already know, dubbed the most influential person in the world on gender policy in 2018. She was given this designation. I think it carries forward to today. She has rallied a global movement of leaders in government, business, and civil society to end violence against women and girls. You have the floor. Phumzile.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Colleagues and fellow panelists, thank you so much for the remarks that you have made. Thank you, Pramila. Thanks, Maria, for shining the light on this very important subject. Thank you to all of you who are here with us to mark the International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women, and I want to underline elimination because that is the task. 16 days is an opportunity for us to highlight what we are doing, what the situation is, but 365 days is to do the work. So that what we highlight today is a lot about what we are going to do in the 365 days. And today we will hear some ideas about the work being done and what still needs to be done. And of course, next year, when we mark the 25 years of the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action, we will be committing ourselves to do more work. As we mark also the 20 years of the Women, Peace and Security Resolution 1325, we will be further committing ourselves towards the elimination of all violence against women, including and in particular rape. We will be dubbing the campaign next year, Generation Equality, because we're claiming that we are going to be that generation that will change things, because we know so much now about what needs to be done, what works, what goes wrong, and we've mobilized a lot of people from every walk of life. This next 10 years, the decade of action that must complete the implementation to the extent that we can of the SDGs, has to be about fixing this issue as well. Rape isn't an isolated brief act. It is a gross violation of human rights with long-term, devastating, visible and invisible impact. It has life-changing effects that range from pregnancy, sexually transmitted disease, immense and long-term trauma, and unwarranted sense of shame. In some situations, women are rejected by their loved ones. They are even punished for being raped by institutions in society, including by the institutions such as religious institutions, cultural institutions, all of which are institutions that are supposed to look after society. In both conflicts and in peacetime, it often shapes women's decisions to move from their communities through fear of attack or the stigmatization of survivors. And yet, in many cases, perpetrators walk free. As a result, misogyny is strengthened. It feels like it is rewarded, it is tolerated, and therefore it makes it difficult for us to give a strong message to perpetrators that this crime has consequences. Although rape is so pervasive, it is badly underreported for the reasons that I've just mentioned, including the fact that the women are more likely to be poorly treated by law enforcement, humiliated, and treated like a problem. But we also know that there are situations and there are institutions for law enforcement that are trying to make this right, and we want to highlight their work. We are now today calling upon you and all of us to make sure that we do everything not to turn our backs on the millions of women and girls whose lives have been forever changed in this way. We are calling out impunity by calling out for broader culture, by calling out for the end of a broader culture that trivializes and permits rape, and calling for women to be given and treated in the way they are supposed to be treated. Most of all, we are calling for an end of rape and the rape culture that permeates our society. We know that rape, and Pramila has highlighted that, is rooted in a complex set of beliefs, power relations, and control. Dominant norms of masculinity assume that men's sexual entitlement is a given, and they create an expectation that men can control and coerce women, particularly in relation to sex. We also have seen jokes about women and even about rape being tolerated, with many being bystanders and missing an opportunity to intervene and to end the trivialization of this pain that women and girls suffer. Today, we are also calling on governments and services to take the positive steps necessary to scale up the response, which must include increasing accountability by making rape universally illegal, including in those countries which still allow marital rape, and holding rapists to account in every country that is a member of the United Nations. Putting victims at the center of the response, strengthening the capacity of law enforcement officials to investigate these crimes and respond in a way that shows that they believe survivors and are equipped to direct them to the right support services. Ending all forms of cultural practices and eliminating homophobia. Increasing the number of women in the police forces and supporting survivors with all legal aid and essential services that we can provide in our countries. One of the ways we tackle violence against women and girls at UN Women is through the multilateral respect framework, which informs policymakers about how to prevent and respond to violence against women with a collective commitment to action. Through the UN and EU Spotlight Initiative, we are also working to transform the inequalities that drive gender-based violence and eliminate global acceptance of sexual abuse and harassment of women and girls. Today, I also want to congratulate the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women for achieving its resource mobilization target for grant giving to civil society organizations 1 year ahead of schedule. Because these civil society partners, as you will hear, do an exceptional job. I want to also thank you for all the good work that you do. Thanks to the voluntary contribution by member states and from the EU UN Spotlight Initiative, the Trust Fund has now been able to invest $40 million in more than 90 civil society organization projects in over 57 countries, working to prevent and end violence against women and girls just in 2019. And we will double the grants in 2020. And thanks again to the member states that have made this possible. 2 weeks ago, I was in Bonn. Yes, please. And there's room for more. We open for business. 2 weeks ago, I was in Bosnia-Herzegovina at the first ever global convention of the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women Grantees. One of them, of the participants, there is Anya, is here with us today. The convention focused on progress made since the adoption of the Beijing Platform for Action and towards the work that we want to do to end violence against women and girls. It ended with the UN Trust Fund's 2 youngest grantees representative presenting me with a set of recommendations to inform the process of global consultations on Beijing +25. They focus on key issues such as sustainable funding for the work of civil society, capacity and institution building, and the collection and use of evidence. I am fully committed to take these recommendations forward in upcoming meetings with some of you and deliberations, and to make sure that this becomes a crucial part on our work for generation equality. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, we are generation equality. If not us, who? Our responsibility is to end rape within a generation and to do all we can in the decade in the next 10 years, which is the decade that must make sure that we score very high on the implementation of SDGs. And again, I thank you for being here.
I think we just got very inspired. Thank you, Pumzila. I'd like to again introduce Ms. Ajna Jusic, who is going to look at this issue from a different angle. She's the president of the Association of Forgotten Children of War. She'll introduce us to her groundbreaking fight to uphold the rights and dignity of as many as 4,000 children who were born from wartime sexual violence in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to be here today with you. My name is Ajna Jusic and I'm 26 years old. I'm coming from Bosnia and I'm president of the Association Forgotten Children of War. So, 26 years ago, my mother was struck by a fate I would never wish to anyone. She survived a war rape and she gave birth to me. For years she lived and she still lives in a society that thinks she is guilty for what happened, a society that was never ready to accept her. Sometimes I'm really angry on society, wondering why they rejected my mother or why they leave her all alone. But after some time I realized that looking for who to blame is not the answer. A systematic mistake was committed by state structures. Immediately after the war, the people and women survivors were left all alone without any support. A dark cloud of trauma came over our country and people struggled for survival only for themselves. Soon after the war, we got information that in Bosnia about 50,000 women and men had survived war rape, and that was it. There was no systematic move from the state to respond. Everything was left on the numbers and all the shame was left to the women survivors. It remains on the backs of the people who actively discriminate today, but only because they have never had opportunity to learn and to accept differences. Everything I said now made my mother to hide the truth from me for 15 long years. I believe it was the longest period in her life. In the time of discovering my identity and trying to figure out what I want to be in my life, I spent nights thinking about my father. I made so many scenarios in my mind, but just not the one where I was born as a result of war rape. I learned that I came to this world as a result of the worst and most aggravated crime against the human body, as a result of my mother's biggest trauma. I was speaking with my mother, and I promised her that I would make this world a better place for her. And that is why I'm standing here in front of you today. I hope that I am on the right path. Together with my friends from association, also children born out of war rape and children whose fathers were members of peacekeeping mission, I am building a better future for all of us, not only in Bosnia, but in the whole world. Our association creates a model of working with the children born out of war, and we are the first who try to make a unique law on the children born of war. Every step we make is writing a small piece of history. We spent years of waiting for someone to discover us, wondering why our mothers continue to suffer because of system and unaccepting society, while knowing they deserve better after all they've gone through. The years has passed by without justice and without fairness. My mother's heroism has no measure. Her struggle for me was incredible and still is today. She fought for a child who had been deprived of fundamental rights, to know her origin, a child who didn't know and would never know family ties, a child who had no idea of their genetic predispositions, but who was born with the heart defect. She fought for me. Thanks to my mother and all survivors, their strength, I am who I am today. I am Aina Jusic, woman, daughter, human rights activist, a young person who believes in an equal society, who struggles to erase labels that are systematically imposed and socially created. I am 26 years old and I am ready to invest 3 more times, 26 if not more, in a fight that will bring about more positive, more equal future for all children. Today, as I stand here, somewhere in the world there is a rape happening. Somewhere in the world there is a woman's scream of sadness, pain, deprivation of dignity. Today, as I stand here, another child born as a result of rape just been born. I will fight for the future of all children born of war. I will fight for them to not go through everything I went. And at the times I went through a hell of peer violence. I went through fight with myself. Together with my mother, we fought with unjust state and ignorant society. Today I'm fighting so that all of us, all children born of war, can claim their rights, so that we can be educated without discrimination, so that no child has to look down in the shame at the medical corners like I have done. Every time I had to explain that I don't know my father's name because my mom survived a war rape. I fight and will fight for society to become empathy and live in solidarity, for society to have understanding, for society to support women survivors of rape, whether in a war or peace. I know that I cannot stop the wars, but I'm sure that I can act on the behalf of all vulnerable people who are with us and who unfortunately will be born with the effects of the new wars. Let's be a society of equal values, not a society of different labels. We build the bridges of peace, solidarity, empathy, support, but all above, we build bridges of humanity, because this is the only way that we can create a healthier society for us and for future generations. Thank you.
May I ask everyone?
All right, so that's how we come out of the United Nations, currently commemorating the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. This taking place at their headquarters in New York. Ashna Jusik was just giving her speech there, and she's the president of the Forgotten Children of War, basically telling the world that she was born as a result of rape, and sharing her story and vowing that she has actually made a commitment to be there for the children like her. Earlier on, we saw the United Nations Executive Director for Women, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, as well, sharing her story, giving out her speech, basically saying that the 16 days that we commemorating now are just there to highlight the work that still needs to be done. But the 365 days a year are actually there for the implementation of the plans that they do have. So saying that next year they'll be committing to do more work in terms of the elimination of violence on children and women. So she says that we are a generation equality, meaning that we are a generation that's got information, a generation that knows what needs to be done going forward, and also calling upon everyone not to turn their back on the women and children who have been violated, calling for an end of rape, and also calling on governments to scale up the response for violence, and saying that those perpetrators have to be held to account. So appealing for the strengthening of the capacity of law enforcement agencies, and saying that there've got to be an end really to all forms of cultural policies. So that's basically what has been taking place at the United Nations in New York now, where the theme for this year is centered around the color orange, which they say that it symbolizes hope and a brighter future without violence against women. So of course there's that target that's been set to end violence by the year 2030. So in a decade's time, we should be seeing an end to a complete end rather to violence on women and children, according to Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. So those are the discussions that are currently taking place in New York now. We're taking a quick break on your story. There's little to come before we wrap up.